Showtime. Hey, hey, hey. Happy Tuesday, everyone. Post Easter lesson, pre tax day lesson. Today we're talking about cash flow. I talk a lot about profitability. Like, I think if you were to point at anything that I teach or talk about, and you had to like list it off, profitability is probably one of the first things that most people would say. And that's because I think a lot of times people get into this particular industry without a good business background or foundation. And they know they want to cover costs, but they don't see or recognize the value of profitability. And profitability is literally that's why we're doing this, right? It's not just to cover our costs, it's to like build a business and a life. And it became really obvious to me this week that there's another piece of that financial education that maybe I don't talk about enough. And so I'm going to talk about that today. It's tax season, everyone. I don't know if you knew that or not. If you are a C Corp or a sole prop, I think, maybe not a sole prop. I don't know. I'm not a tax person, but the tax day for that was March 15th, I think. For everybody else, it's April 18th this year. And if you're not going to meet the April 18th deadline, definitely file an extension. It does prevent penalties from being charged if you're a little bit late filing your taxes. But a number of businesses have already filed their taxes as of March 15th. And so the feedback that I've gotten from a number of people is they say I made all this money, but where is it? It's not in my bank account. And that's where cash flow comes in. And so I wanted to talk a little bit today about what some symptoms might be in your business that could indicate that you have a poor handle on cash flow, and then some tactics that we can utilize to get a better handle on cash flow. And so while you're watching, if you guys want to drop any questions that you have around cash flow, and then also let me know what your relationship to cash flow is. Do you guys track your cash flow? Do you feel like you have a healthy cash flow? Are you concerned about your cash flow? Give me a little bit of a gut check here as to the topic of conversation today, and then what your relationship is with it. And while you guys are doing that, I'm going to pull up my notes so I can stay on topic. Let's see. All right. So the first thing that we'll talk about is the symptom of poor cash flow management. So if you experience some of these in your business, we might want to look at cash flow. The first thing that we would want to look at is whether or not you have an emergency fund. This is something that we probably have heard a lot. I'm down here in Nashville. Like everyone here is indoctrinated into the Dave Ramsey way of financial management, personal finances. But emergency fund is one of the first things that we hear, that you should have at least 3 months worth of expenses in savings. The same applies for your business. I am and will always be, I'll go to the grave being a huge proponent of Profit First. And Profit First saved my business during COVID. And it was because I was using Profit First that I knew that I could pay myself, I could pay my staff, I could pay for my expenses. And so if you're not already a practitioner of Profit First, I highly recommend it. But at the very least, create an emergency fund, another account where you can't touch it, likely that you don't even look at it, and then start funneling money away into that emergency fund until you have 3 months worth of expenses. Now, the goal is not to use that, but if you have to in the down season or until you get your cash management worked out, it's your money. You can do what you want with it. But ideally, you would always have 3 months of an emergency fund tucked away. The second symptom of poor cash flow management are frequent late payments. So if you are regularly missing payment deadlines for your suppliers or credit cards, your business loans, your sales tax payments, which in some cases are due quarterly, in some cases are due monthly, depending on where you live. If that bill comes around every month or every quarter and you're like, shoot, I don't have the cash for that, let me file and then I'll pay a little bit later. That's a symptom of poor cash flow management, especially because in sales tax, you should have already collected that and set it aside, right? That all that money should already be accounted for. And that's just one example of a frequent late payment that might happen. The third one, and this is the one that becomes the most obvious to others that you have poor cash flow management skills, is difficulty meeting payroll. If you're struggling to pay your employees on time, that can signal cash flow problems, and it can roll into bigger problems such as decreased morale and potentially legal issues. But for the most part, we don't really see that in the mobile bar industry. The fourth symptom of poor cash flow management is a growing accounts receivable. And I'm going to try not to use super accounting terms, but an accounts receivable is when you are owed money. Your business is owed money. So if you take a 50% deposit and then the event day comes and goes and that person's, your client still owes you 50%, that remaining 50% is now an account receivable. Thankfully, blessed be, the vast majority of people in this industry do not struggle with accounts receivables on the regular. And that's because it is industry standard in our industry to obtain full payment before the execution of the event. Now, if you ever get into larger events, or if you get into government contracted events, you're not going to see that. You're not going to be able to get all of that money before the event is executed. The government oftentimes requires a net 30, 60, 90 even, which means they're expecting you to float the business until they pay, and you've already delivered the service. If you don't have good, solid cash flow management strategies, then you might struggle taking on contracts that have net 30, net 60, net 90. So if you have an increasing accounts receivable or scenarios where people owe you more and more money, that's a symptom of poor cash flow. Another symptom of poor cash flow would be persistent negative cash flow. And this is sometimes hard to see because money comes in, money comes out, money comes in, money comes out. But if you are tracking your expenses in something like Wave app, which is free, along with your income, then it has a dashboard report, and I know QuickBooks has it too. Even Novo, the bank that I use, has this. It'll have a bar for income, and it'll have a bar for expenses, and then it'll have like a line graph in between. And if you regularly see the expenses as being deeper than the income is high, then you have negative cash flow. And even though your account may never hit zero, because the way that the money's flowing in and out, if you see too many of those low bars lower than your high bars, that indicates negative cash flow. Another symptom is excessive debt. So if your business relies really heavily on debt to fund your operations, then it's likely that you struggle to manage cash flow effectively, especially when loan payments come due. Now, if you're just getting started out and you're like using a credit card with a 0% interest, or maybe you have a small loan or something like that, it's a little bit expected when you're first getting started out, but that isn't something that we want to carry on throughout the rest of the business. Another symptom of poor cash flow management is inaccurate or outdated financial records. You can't manage what you can't measure. And so if you are not regularly keeping your books, if you're not regularly looking at and I don't want to go so far as like balancing your checkbook. You don't necessarily have to reconcile everything, but you do have to have a good handle on what's coming out, what's coming in. And if you're not regularly doing that, then it can be really hard for you to make well-informed decisions. You might think you have more money than you do. And so you might be overspending based on the cash flow that's available. If you recognize and you're paying attention to your financial records, you can actually make decisions in a way that are helpful to your business. So for example, you might need a piece of equipment, but based on what your cash flow looks like, that you should probably hold off a month or two when cash flow is a little bit better. The another symptom of poor cash flow management are inventory issues. So if you find that you have you're overstocked on some items, or that you are persistently understocked on some items, that can eat up cash flow. So if you go and buy a pallet of plastic cups, because you know that buying in bulk is a really advantageous price wise, like per unit. And so you go and you buy in bulk in cups, and then you struggle to meet your bills for a couple of months because all of your cash is literally tied up in a pallet of cups. Then it's going to take you a while to actually um, flatten out the expense that you've made up front, and that can create or that inventory issue can create cash flow issues. And the last symptom of that I was able to come up with, but the last symptom of cash flow issues in your business is chronic stress and firefighting. I can't tell you how much of a relief it'll be as a business owner if you know that your cash flow is controlled, that you're not constantly having to look to see, is the money in the account for all of these things that are coming in and going out. Just having good cash flow issues can go a long way towards regulating that nervous system as an entrepreneur, because Lord knows we have enough to worry about. So those are the how many did I give you? Nine symptoms of cash flow issues that you might be experiencing in your business. And if you do have any of those, then it is likely that we need to take a look at some tactics to help you manage your cash flow. And I will get into that in a second. I just want to look over here and see what questions we have. If you're an LLC, do you need to file an extension for the business and you personally, or does that automatically happen with the one or the other? It does not automatically happen. The LLC, when you file an LLC, you're telling the government that it is its own entity. And while it is a flow through entity, meaning that you're going to file your LLC taxes and it's going to give you like a, I don't want to, it's like a K1 or a K2 or like a 1098 or something like that. I'm not an accountant, but you're going to have a piece of paper that you then take to do your personal taxes, and so you need to file an extension for both. What is an example of a government contract event that will have a pending payment 60, 30, 90 days? So I have a history of working in the DC metro area, and the DC metro area has a ton of government government contractors, but it has a bunch of government contracts. So you can apply to be a government contractor. And then if the National Academy of Sciences or something does a large event or a fundraising event, then you can get contracted for any number of ways. Caterers get contracted, bartenders get contracted, political affiliation stuff they host events, and they may not want to pay you right away because they have such volume, they have bargaining power. And so they can literally say like, hey, we got 12 events in the next 12 months. We'll give you this contract, but we demand net 60 terms. And then it's on you to decide whether or not it's worth that guaranteed business or whether it's not. All right, let's get on to some tactics that will help you manage your cash flow. The first, which I kind of insinuated in the symptoms section, is accurate financial record keeping. So if you can accurately maintain your financial records, your income, your expenses, then you can make better and more informed decisions regarding your cash flow. The second thing is cash flow forecasting. Now, we're in a seasonal business, and so you might already inherently see this, but there might be sections of your year, and I can't really blanket suggest anything because the seasons throughout the entire country are very different. But if you take a look at the seasonality of your business, based on your payment terms, you can also estimate your cash flow. So if you're super busy in July, that when I lived in New York, July was like prime wedding season. If you're super busy in July, you can expect huge cash influx in June, assuming a 30-day final payment. But If you're super dead in October and you're not booking in October for the next year, you might be booking a couple, but maybe not a lot. Then in October, you might have low cash flow. And so if you can see um, or project your cash flow, you can do two things. The first thing that I recommend twice in one video is profit first. And the reason profit first is so powerful, especially for seasonal businesses, is that it's all based on percentage. So in those months, July in this example, where you're making lots and lots of money because the cash flow is coming in because it's a busier season, and you're funneling those into their respective accounts, but then you're paying yourself or your staff or whatever based on the percentages, then it's gonna that those accounts are gonna get fat during the fat seasons, and then you'll have those to tap into during the lean season. So that's the first way that I recommend cash flow smoothing. The second way that you can do it is you can actually alter your payment terms. This is the harder version, but you can alter your payment terms based on when someone books. So if someone is going to book in a certain time of the year, maybe you give them a 3 payment plan so that you can cover and get some cash flow in those drier months. And then you have 3 smaller payments, but you have, payments more frequently. There are some caveats to this. One, more likelihood that people default on payments. The more payments people have to make, the more chances that you'll have to follow up with people. The more people have to think about the fact that they have to pay you, right? Sometimes we just want people to pay us and then forget that they paid us because they want them to focus on other things. So there are some drawbacks to that particular method, but I have seen people use it in the events industry where, depending on the season that they would book, they would use a different payment policy so that they could cover those dry months with some cash flow. The third way that you can manage cash flow is to actually take a look at your processes around accounts receivable. So again, we don't really see a whole lot of this problem in the mobile bar industry, but just for edification, that if you have poor processes around collecting your accounts receivable, then you're less likely to collect your accounts receivable. So if you don't have payment reminders set up through an automation, for example, that hey, your final payment is due, or your final payment is overdue, we need to get the final payment at least X days before, or we're going to cancel our contract. If you don't have those processes all set up, it is possible that you're missing out on money that should be yours. If you don't have a process of updating invoices after final guest count comes in, you might be leaving money on the table. So that is another tactic for cash flow, is to set up really good account receivable processes. The fourth way is to manage your accounts payable. Now, you really have to figure out where you are in regards to cash flow health before making certain accounts payable decisions. Account payable is what you owe other people. And I gave you the cup suggestion or example earlier in this. So let's say it's the end of the year and you're trying to get as many expenses on this year's taxes as possible. And so you decide to bulk up on cups because you're going to use them eventually. They don't go bad, right? And so you get a whole pallet of cups and it costs you, and I don't know what the cost of a pallet of cups is, but let's just say $1,000. That's probably not nearly enough, but let's say $1,000. So you pay $1,000 for those cups. And then you're going to use that $1,000 worth of cups over the course of the year. If you have a period in there that's really dry in cash flow, you might look back on that and be like, man, I probably should have waited to buy those cups because I actually kind of need that $1,000 now. Even though you don't get the discount, sometimes there's more value in paying for things monthly. I learned this the hard way not too long ago when I bought a piece of software that I was like, I love this software. And then I got in there and I hated that software. And I was like, I'd already paid for the whole year. So that's gone. You know what I mean? But if I had paid monthly, then when I canceled, then I could just recoup whatever, whatever I had paid, gone, but I don't have to pay for the rest of the year. So sometimes paying things in regular, smaller intervals, even if it's a little bit more expensive, it might be less expensive to spread it out than it would be to put it on a credit card with interest, for example, right? And so that's some of the mental math that we have to do when we decide whether to pay in full or to spread payments out over the long term. You can also do things to manage accounts payable by, if you do have a fair amount of cash, to make it more worth your while, to negotiate larger payments for a discount. So I had my an office outside my house shortly, like at the end of COVID, when my kids were constantly around, and I asked the landlord, if I pay you for the entire year's worth of rent, will you reduce the overall rent? And he was like, sure. And I think it worked out to be like, I don't know, $2,000 off if I paid the year in advance. So yes, I had to pay more up front, but it was $2,000 less overall. Okay. We already talked about optimizing your inventory management so that you don't carry too much stock at once. Number 6, my 6th recommendation is using a budget to control expenses. My favorite way of doing a budget, once you have historicals. So if you're brand new, this might not work, but if you're more, if you have at least 12 months under your belt and you have a good understanding of the industry, you can create a budget based on percentage or fixed cost. And we actually have these spreadsheets in the academy. And if you're in any of the group programs, you've already done this exercise. But you can put in percentages based on your estimated revenue. And then it'll tell you, last year, my cups and all my consumables, I spent 5%. I'm just making these numbers up. And so then it can project out. And then if you look at that every month with what your real numbers are, you can then say, oh my goodness, that was really high. We need to find somewhere else to cut back. Or, oh, that's really low. I have a little bit more cash that I can put in the emergency expense fund, right? So if you're using a budget, you can make more of those decisions in real time. So highly recommend using a budget to control both your expenses and your cash flow. We already talked about maintaining a cash reserve. The 8th suggestion that I have here is explore financing options. Now, this is a little bit better of a recommendation for more advanced businesses or businesses that have been in business for a couple of years, because they then have history. But there aren't too many established businesses that I know of that don't utilize somebody else's money for their growth. So a line of credit is a real easy way to do this. If you and I think there's even banks out there like Blue Vine. I'm not recommending Blue Vine. I've never used them, but I do know that they offer checking accounts. I do think that they're also profit first friendly, and they offer lines of credit. Lines of credit can be really helpful during time periods of low cash reserves without having to use some more expensive lending types like credit cards. So just even having one can add some increased flexibility to your business. And then my favorite, number 10, is to invest in technology. Technology is great in automating and streamlining financial processes. So if you're not using accounting software, I definitely recommend it. Invoicing tools that have automated reminders when people haven't paid their bills. And they also automate and facilitate the way that you can see your financials, so you don't have to work so hard to get an understanding of kind of where your business is. So that's a little lesson about cash flow and how important it is. And also, don't know if people know this, but cash flow is the number one killer of small businesses. It is the thing that will close your doors. If you don't have access to capital and you don't have access to cash to keep your business afloat, it can really hinder growth, which obviously growth is hungry. Growth is cash hungry. And so you have to have cash on hand in order to grow. But it also, if you don't have access to it, it can stop a business dead in its tracks. And so we definitely want to make sure not only to focus on the profitability of our business, but on the cash flow, so that when we get to the end of the year and we do our taxes, you're not looking at it going, how did my accountant say I made all this money? Where is it? It's nowhere. It's not in my account. And we can do that by using tools to better manage our cash flow. Okay, let's see, what questions do we have? When first starting out in your business, what are your thoughts on a business loan for funding? I think it would be helpful, but my husband wants to use our personal finances. I feel like this is hanging us up. Okay. I have a couple thoughts on this. The first is that interest rates are really high right now. That's a consideration. So if I would say launch your business as inexpensively as possible, meaning whatever is not absolutely necessary to get started, just skip it. Borrowing money right now is just expensive. And so let's say you get a business loan for 6%. That means anything you used that money on is going to be 6% more expensive than if you had skipped it or if you'd found another way to pay for it. I'm a big believer in using other people's money to grow your business. So if you have a good sense that using that money plus the 6%, and I'm just using 6%, I don't know what business loans are right now, that you're going to make it more than 6% over that time period, then yeah, that's great. I'm a big fan of trying to use the cheapest forms of lending first. So if you can get a 0% APR credit card and use that, then and get it all paid off before the end of the 18 month or 24 months or whatever they offer, that's a good way to do it. I also warn against business loans are hard for this industry to get for a few different reasons. One, they see alcohol and they see that you don't have a liquor license and they're immediately like, this isn't legal. They don't want to do the deep work of figuring out, oh, but it is legal because we're serving, we're not selling. They just see it as a liability that's going to have a hard time getting past underwriting. The other consideration there is that people, in my experience, talking to lots and lots of people who've gone after loans, is that the whole mobile concept is a little confusing to them because they kind of think that you're just driving around slinging margaritas out the window, but that also the entire business has risk because it's in motion. And I mean, most people's mobile bar business, their rig is only like a really small part of it. So I think business loans can be difficult for this particular industry in particular, but if you can qualify for one, I think that's great. My recommendation is that you don't necessarily need a loan. I'm a big believer that the mobile bars can launch for $5,000. And then when the business has enough momentum to actually pay for more equipment and more expenses, then that's when you should spend more money getting it spun up. That's a good question. What else? We have a couple more minutes. So if you have questions, anything business related, I'll point you in a direction if I don't know. It can be about cash flow or it can be about anything else. Yeah, you're welcome. And if you're just tuning in at the end, the replay should be available as soon as we hop off so you can rewatch and learn more about cash flow and its importance to business. Oh, good, Kristen. I'm glad you found it helpful. Yeah, keep your costs as low as possible. This industry is an expensive industry to maintain, especially once you start adding rigs, but it isn't really that expensive to get started. And I think a lot of people do it backwards. They invest really heavily in the beginning, and then they don't have the momentum or the cash flow to continue to grow fast enough in order to make it worth their while. And so what happens is they spend all their money in the beginning, they then stall out on being able to grow and to expand. And then 18 to 24 months later, they're like, I'm not making enough money to make this worth it. I'm going to sell everything and I'm going to move on. I hate to see that happen because the most successful mobile bar owners that I've ever met, and I'm talking multi-million-dollar mobile bar owners, started with nothing. They didn't have a rig. it's not required to get started or to build seven-figure businesses. Billing software. My favorite billing software is Dubsado. Wave also does invoicing, but Dubsado is my favorite, and probably because it also had all of that payment automation and it was already attached to my CRM. So it just made it really easy. We paid out of pocket for getting up and running. We'll be opening in a couple of weeks. Awesome. Congratulations. All right. Well, that's us at 2:30. Our time is up. Thank you everyone for coming and learning about probably a pretty dry, boring topic like cash flow. Hopefully you found it helpful. This is probably going to be our last live lesson in Q&A. The team has kind of looked at all of our various different support methodologies, and it seems like y'all really like the podcast. We get over 200 listens in under 7 days to podcast form content. And we only get maybe 50 or so to the live lessons. And so we'll probably pivot this experience into weekly podcasts, which in the past we've only kind of done those sporadically as we do them. And we're also playing around with some monthly hot seats where we can get people to volunteer to have us poke inside their business, whether it be reviewing their pricing and packaging or their website or copy or any of that. And so we'll have a way for people to sign up for those if they're brave enough to let us take a look at their business and get feedback. So this will be our last Q&A like this. We're always available for on our social medias in the Facebook group. So don't stop asking questions by any means. But also go and follow our podcast because we're going to continue the education over there since it seems like more of you are over there. But anyways, this was super fun. Thank you so much. And we will continue to keep teaching.